All right, Christmas week. DJ's got some time off. I'm PK. Joining us now, CBS Sports college football expert, Shehan Jeyarajah. Shehan, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we got a lot to discuss. First, we'll look back at the first rounds of the playoff games. Obviously, Alabama and Oklahoma was a thrilling game for sure, big time. The other games, not as much. Just your overall impression of what you saw.
Yeah, I mean, look, if we go back to last year, right, we had 4 non-competitive games, so I think that cutting it down to 2 this year is a pretty good start. But, that Alabama-Oklahoma game was a fascinating one. Obviously, Oklahoma gets out to that huge lead, and Alabama storms all the way back. For me, I was disappointed by Oklahoma in that second half. I thought that they showed a lot of fight in the first half and just ran out of answers a little quicker than I hoped that they would. And for Texas A&M Miami, I mean, obviously a game that was the first ever playoff game to be scoreless at halftime, the lowest scoring playoff game in college football playoff history. Like it was a rock fight for so much of the game, but I think that the team that was better for most of the day won, and that was Miami.
And do you take anything from James Madison scoring a bunch of points in the second half? I know it gives Dan Lanning some talking points to act like, okay, we're not satisfied. That wasn't Oregon standards and all that. But is that any form of concern going forward? Because obviously they play Texas Tech up next.
So I don't think that it gives me a lot of concern. Now, I will say, I mean, obviously everybody's going to point to sort of the points that they scored in the second half. I mean, JMU was moving the ball pretty well in the first half as well. But, especially when I look to the matchups ahead, I think that a huge part of that was Alonzo Barnett is a really dynamic quarterback, somebody who's able to make plays with his legs and keep the chains moving. And when I look ahead to the matchups that Oregon could have, you have Baron Morton at Texas Tech, who's more of a pocket passer and is dealing with some injuries. You have Fernando Mendoza, most likely, and he's not necessarily somebody who moves a lot. Then you have Julian Sayin. So I think that Barnett was a sort of unique challenge from that perspective. And so I don't necessarily expect it to be something that carries over. Now, I think that, look, a lot of programs in college football should consider, like, the importance of having a dual-threat quarterback in this moment. I think it just opens up your playbook and allows you to keep the chains moving in a different kind of way. But Oregon's not going to see that for most likely the rest of the season.
Now, with those 2 group of 5s getting in, both lose as expected, Nick Saban coming out and saying, hey, we don't do this in baseball. We don't make the AAA team go play the Dodgers in a World Series and all that stuff. Of course, these guys aren't necessarily AAA. They're in the same level, same classification, so it might be a little bit different there. But do you think there's any ramifications to make sure that this doesn't happen again?
Well, okay. I think that the conversation around this to me has gotten ridiculous. I mean, first of all, the reason that there were 2 a group of 5 teams in this year is because the ACC's champion went 7-5. Like, right. There is no system, no pathway that you're going to create that can account for the fact that the ACC was won by a team that was not very good. Like, that's not something that should happen. That's not something I think is going to happen again. And I think the ACC certainly, I think if anything changes, the biggest thing is that the ACC is going to need to revamp their tiebreaker scenarios to really try to put their best foot forward and produce a champion that is capable of being in the college football playoff. But again, most years it's going to be one team getting in. It's going to be one game. Most likely that game isn't going to be close. But, like, at the same time, I mean, I think one of the things that drives me crazy about this whole conversation is that the sort of most powerful programs have done so much to try to hoard resource, hoard money, keep it away from everybody else. And then they're yelling at those other teams for not having enough resource. Like, the New York Yankees don't prevent other teams from getting money. I mean, the Dallas Cowboys make a lot of money, but, like, they have to share it with the rest of the NFL. And so I don't know. I think that, like, to me, so much of this just misses the point of what college football is. It's a hyper-local sport. There were fans from Virginia who made the trip out to Oregon, and they knew their team was going to lose, and it didn't matter because that opportunity, getting to be on that stage, was worth it. Certainly, I'm sure that folks down in Utah can certainly talk about what it meant to the University of Utah to get those shots whenever they did have a team that was at that level, and same with Boise State, and same with TCU, so on and so on. So, I mean, I think that to me, like, the conversation is so short-sighted about all this stuff and so reactive, and I promise we don't have to have this much reverence for the 7 p.m. TNT TV window.
Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports, joining us as he's done Mondays throughout the football season. Going forward, as far as the college football landscape, I think that the games are the games, but off the field, I think the number one story right now is who is going to be Michigan's coach. Dillingham, they announced he was going to stay at Arizona State, and so now it leads you to think, what are they going to do? And the Kyle Whittingham story is fascinating to us because he doesn't say he's retired, and he had press availability on last Thursday, and all of us were up there, and he made a statement. Somebody said, well, what's going to be the process determining if you're going to coach again or not? And then he said, look down, it says the process, and then he went very simple. If the phone rings, I'll answer it, right? And if I like what's being said, I'll stay on the line. That's basically a paraphrase of what he meant. He's 66 years old, which, I don't know that that's that big of a deal, but maybe to some people it is. He just turned 66 less than a month ago. It looks like he's still got his energy. Do you think that he could be a candidate, a serious candidate at Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that two things about this, right? I think that if you are a hiring athletic director, you understand that this is not a coach who is going to be there for 8 years, right? And so, because again, like, Kyle Whittingham is, obviously in incredible shape, incredible health, incredible energy. But also, we've been talking about him retiring for the last 5 years, essentially. And so if you're hiring him as your new coach, you know that it's not a long-term decision necessarily. But if you're Michigan, I think that that's what makes this really interesting, because maybe maybe you hire him to stabilize your program over the next 3 to 4 years. And also, by the way, maybe to win at a high level. He's an incredible coach, of course, who would be working with incredible resource at Michigan. So I think that for me, like, it's a fit that makes a lot of sense. I don't think they're going to get other elite candidates in the mix. We've already seen, like you said, Kenny Dillingham formally close the door on that. Kalen DeBoer formally closed the door on that. Like, I just don't think that there's a whole lot out there that's clearly better than bringing Kyle Whittingham along and letting him kind of rebuild your program. So it's something that makes a lot of sense to me, but also I think that Michigan probably views that as, sort of a backup option. And I don't mean that as a negative, but I mean that in the literal sense of, like, he's not going anywhere, and you know that you have that option available to you if you strike out on 3 or 4 other options that you're going to try. So I'll be interested to see what direction they ultimately go. But, the longer that this drags out, the more the Whittingham thing makes sense to me.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I'm wondering if they just decide, well, you're supposed to get a coach and, like, he's going to be here 10 years. And I think that's
right.
Overrated. When they hired Urban Meyer at Utah 20-some years ago, and he only stayed 2 years, but it was 2 phenomenal years. 2 years to that point that they had never experienced, or at least hadn't experienced in most people's lifetime, maybe going back to the early 60s or 50s. He brought him the outright title, and obviously they break the BCS the next season and all that stuff. So it was only – it's less than 24 months if you want to add it up, but wow, what a 24 months. We were working, doing sports radio here at the time. I was a beat writer, I was doing both. I was doing sports radio and was a beat writer for the Salt Lake Tribune. So, we remember it well. And I was like, all right, would you have hired him if you knew he was going to only be here 2 years? Well, if you knew the results that he was going to give you in 2 years, and then at that point you could pass it along to Kyle Whittingham, Obviously, the overwhelming answer would be yes. But I'm wondering, we don't necessarily know how it's going to be. We're looking at it from perspective rather than into the future. My thought is that I'm wondering if they do like Penn State, a bunch of guys say no, and they still get a decent coach in Campbell from Iowa State. Now, it's a different story. They chose to fire Franklin, who was an accomplished coach. Michigan, their hand was basically forced. So it's not like, well, I can argue, is Matt Campbell really going to be better than James Franklin? Whoever Michigan hires, well, they had to hire somebody because of the situation, so it's a little bit different. But I'm wondering, do you think they just waited out? Somebody will eventually say yes, who's younger, if they offer it to them, right?
Yeah, no, I think that, again, that's why you go through your process, right? Because you see who's interested, you see what's available to you. And again, like you said, I mean, nobody would have said no to the 2 years of Urban Meyer. And also, by the way, because of what it did for setting up the program long term. Now, I will sort of make the distinction, right, that obviously Urban Meyer left for greener pastures. The thing that you'd be wondering about with Kyle Whittingham or an older coach is, does he just leave to stop coaching, right? And so it doesn't necessarily ensure that something better has happened along the way. Now, that it still might be better, but, you just don't know. But I think that, again, like, if you have somebody if you find a candidate that you feel really good about, who's younger, who you feel like can be the future of your program, like, there's validity to that. Again, I think that Penn State had a really bad process to land on a really good answer in Matt Campbell. I don't think that there is that fallback candidate here at Michigan right now. It's ironic because I've heard multiple places that actually Matt Campbell always coveted the Michigan job, so it's actually really bad luck for them the timing of all of this. But I don't know that there's a candidate like that left out there right now. Especially, I mean, again, ironically, kind of that group of former Big 8 schools, right, had that group of great coaches with Chris Kleiman, with Lance Leipold at Kansas, and obviously neither of those guys are coming off of very much good right now. And so, I think that, again, if you're Michigan and you're making a hire right now, like last time you made a late hire, you promoted internally and kept Sharon Moore. And just from a pure football perspective, I think that we can say that was not a great decision. I don't think it's left the program in all that good shape. Obviously not even getting into all the other stuff. And so I think that if you're Michigan, you have to decide, like, you have a Hall of Fame coach available to you, somebody who's won at the highest level, who's built a program at the highest level. Is that something that you feel like is good enough and important enough for you to invest in for the next couple of years? I think eventually they might come to think that that's something that makes a lot of sense.
Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports, joining us. Over the weekend, we saw Iowa State's Rocco Beck announcing that he's going to go into the transfer portal. What do you make? We saw Josh Hoover, Sam Levitt, these constant musical chairs of quarterbacks. What do we make of it?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting, right, is last year a lot of these quarterbacks were pursued, and a lot of them said no. I think that when we look at the quarterback market in particular, and obviously in the Big 12, but also everywhere, I think that people overestimate how much of it is strictly about money, because these quarterbacks know if I'm in a good position and if I have success, I'm going to go to the NFL, and that's going to be way more valuable to me. Even though, of course, yes, of course, the short-term money is significant, but it's also significant at the schools where they're at. And so I think that the movement in these quarterbacks says a lot more about the instability of these programs right now than it does about whether programs are able to retain, per se. Because, like, I think that obviously Rocco Becht is obvious, right? Like, with him, him moving on, his head coach left in Matt Campbell. Sam Levitt is an interesting situation because I think that for him, like, this season didn't go the way that he wanted. He expected them to be able to build on the 2024 season, and now you can point to him being injured being a big part of the reason for it, but it was the case. And I think that Josh Hoover, too, I think that both sides at TCU and Tim were kind of like, we've probably done all we can do together. Maybe it's time to try something new. So, I don't necessarily view it as like a huge issue or a huge warning sign by any means, but, it's certainly a trend to watch.
Yeah, and you think all these guys will be okay as far as finding a place to land because they give you studies of guys who put their names in the transfer portal and a high percentage don't end up places. Now these guys are high profile guys. Would it be like Miami with Beck going from Georgia to Miami, and so essentially you're still playing at the high level? Do you see that, or do you see any of these guys potentially being in trouble finding a spot?
Yeah, I think with the particular guys who have moved, I don't think they're going to have trouble finding spots. I mean, we've heard a lot of connection between Brendan Sorsby and Texas Tech. We've heard, Sam Levitt be thrown around with some of the elite programs, the LSUs, the Miamis. It'll be interesting to see whether Rocco Beck follows his head coach to Penn State. I mean, that's something that makes a lot of sense. If he doesn't, that becomes, I think, a little bit of an interesting situation, but I do think he lands certainly at a power conference school. So I think that most of these quarterbacks are moving with the understanding that I'm going to get other power conference opportunities, and especially in a quarterback market that in general I don't think is all that good, frankly. I think that all of them will land in comparable or, in some cases better situations.
Okay, in 2.5 hours, the bowl game of the season, Utah State versus Washington State in Idaho. So I want you to take explicit, detailed notes because we're going to quiz you on about that game next week. You got it?
I love it. Let's do it.
Thanks for your time. Have a good holiday, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, that's Shehan Jeyarajah. You can read his stuff and all of the stuff at CBS Sports. They do a great job. I think is it CBS Sports Line? Is that their address, Yak? Do you know? I think it's something like that. But you could easily find that out. And he does great work, and we're appreciative of him joining us as he has throughout Mondays during the college football season. Coming up next, we're going to go live to Boise. Talk to our guy, Scotty G, who will be on the call at noon right here on the Sports Zone. Find out what's cooking on the blue turf in Boise, Idaho. Stay with us here right now as we will come back and talk about the bowl game with Utah State on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.